I can run meetings.
It's a little crazy at times, bro.
All right, everybody, welcome. We're going to get going. My name is Mike Davey. For those of you who don't know me, I am the mayor of Key Biscayne. I want to thank you for coming. This is an absolutely critical issue to this community. I do appreciate the turnout, and I want to see all of you remaining involved. I know we've seen activity on chats and on Twitter and on Facebook about this, but really, this is where we need to start doing things. We need to start doing it here. We need to start doing it in the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County Hall, because those are the places where we're going to start making changes that impact water quality. All these folks here are here to help. They're here to get us educated. They're here to make us understand what's actually going on out there. So a few quick comments about what is happening with the water quality in Key Biscayne and what is the source of the problem. Our water contamination is likely coming from various sources, not just one. Some of the sources that may be contributing to the poor quality of water include elevated amounts of Enterococcus bacteria, which is a marker for fecal matter that may be coming from humans, animals, or both. We have massive seagrass die-off. We've got human activities, which includes pollution, runoff from septic systems, overrun sewers, fertilizers, and so those things are what's impacting our water quality. So then the question that's been coming up is, what is the village of Key Biscayne doing to address these issues? And what we've started doing is we've been allocating funds to try and help figure out where we have problems and what are the sources of the contamination. We've been working with Water Keepers Miami and the University of Miami to test the water and identify the contamination sources. We've been collaborating with the City of Miami and Miami-Dade County, as well as the folks from WASD, the Water and Sewer Department, to find the causes and implement practical solutions. We've hired lobbyists to work on behalf of our local, state, and federal levels to put pressure on lawmakers to resolve this issue. We're working to hire a full-time chief resiliency officer that can help champion this issue. We are having the village staff prioritize and engage on this issue with the county. And we are addressing our own contributions to the water quality issue by examining our septic systems. We still have 212 septics left on the island. We have older pipes. And we have to start looking and seeing what are we doing as a community to have an impact, and how can we reduce that impact on our water quality. And then we're also working, Councilmember Petros, I don't know if she's here, and I apologize, Councilmember Laredo's here, Councilmember Segarola is here, former Councilmember Luis de la Cruz is here, former Councilmember and birthday girl Betty Sim Conroy is here.
Happy birthday.
Come on, happy birthday. Councilmember Brett Moss is in the back hiding out. So I do want to thank them for attending, and I'm sorry, who else? Greg, I'm sorry, right in front of me. Greg Hahn is here as well. So thank you for coming. Councilmember Petros is working on passing a fertilizer ordinance to reduce the amount of fertilizer that we're using in this community. And we're working on stormwater system to improve that and make that better. So those are some of the things we are doing. We can do more. And as I've said, we've got to start putting pressure as a community on the county. But more importantly, we've got to help the county get sources of revenue to at the end of the day, this is about dollars. Okay, we're going to have to invest a massive amount of money in getting these projects done. There's money that's allocated, but more is going to have to come. And we're going to have to talk to the people at the state and the federal level and get them to understand that this is an issue, not only environmental, but it's economic. I mean, we depend on our beaches for our community, for our real estate prices. Miami-Dade relies on it for their economic drivers, which is tourism and real estate. So together, we've got to organize. So what I want to see come out of tonight is people come out of here informed. They come out of here impassioned, but they come out of here with a focus on where we have to put our energies. Because I'm sorry, it's not on the chats. It's not on the Facebook. It's not on Twitter. It's coming. It's talking to your local representatives. You know what? You want to write something? Write a letter to your representative. Write a letter to your senator. Let them know how you feel about the things that are coming forward. Be involved. Find out what we're doing and what we're trying to pass up in Tallahassee and up in D.C. Because that's where the change is going to be made. It's not on the chats, folks. It's just not. It's getting involved with your local government. That's how we all got started. Every elected, anybody who's been elected here or been on a committee, we got involved because we're volunteers and we want to see this community succeed. And that's what we need from all of you. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass it over to our manager.
Thank you, Mayor. That was a wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being here. We're delighted to have such an esteemed panel before you. Some housekeeping this evening. The plan, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have been receiving questions from the community that we have on index cards. If you're interested in submitting a question, please see Mariana in the back, and we can include your questions. If there are any questions that we can't get to this evening, we will be producing a Q&A that we can circulate out. So if we don't get to your question due to time, we'll be getting to those questions. So I'll start with a brief statement that, water is the essential resource for life. No living being on Earth can survive without it. As one of the most important resources this planet offers, it is up to us to preserve, enhance, and restore the quality of our waters for the protection of the environment, for our own public health, and to ensure its continued use for the benefit of the present and future generations. Tonight, we have assembled a panel of some of the foremost experts on water resource management, public health, and policy to educate us on the water quality issues facing the village and the region. Our goal is to learn from their expertise and continue the collaborative working environment in which we collectively address and enhance the water quality throughout the water quality resources in our region. The workshop is intended to be an open discussion on what we, as Floridians, dependent on water for survival, quality of life, and economic vitality, as we understand these issues and improve our resources for the future. So with that said, we are in alphabetical order. So to my left, we have Ms. Kelly Cox, who is an attorney, general counsel to Miami Waterkeepers, an advocacy group that the village has been working with for years. And I'd congratulate you. I understand the city of Miami is going to be engaging your services as well. So congratulations on that. She is a UM grad, both from law school as well as a master's in marine conservation from the Rosenstiel School, just in our neighboring Virginia Key. We have Miss Julie Dick, who is a resident of the island of Key Biscayne. She was a champion and leader in the Green Committee work that had been done over the past 5-6 years. She is also an attorney with Pathman Lewis. She has 12 years of experience working with environmental issues, water, land use, climate change, sustainability issues. In particular, her practice has shifted from private to public sector, and now she's working back more adamantly with private sector, so we can learn how some of the things impacting government agencies are also impacting the private sector. Then we have Colonel Alan Dodd, who is an engineer and the director of the Department of Resilience and Public Works for the city of Miami. Colonel Dodd has over 30 years of experience in engineering, construction management, and leadership through the military. He was the commander and district engineer for Jacksonville District U.S. Army Corps, and he also has spent much of his career in restorative efforts, including the Everglades, beach nourishment projects, and the Portuguese Dam, and the dredging here in the Miami Dam, in the Miami port. Then we have Mr. Samir Elmir, who is a PhD and a PE, an engineer. He is the Director of Environmental Health and Engineering for the Florida Department of Health, Miami-Dade County office. He is a researcher at heart, and a lot of the data that he's been collecting is still in process, and he'll speak to some of the research he's done. He's also responsible for the Healthy Florida, the Healthy Beaches program, which is the agency that does the advisories and the beach closures that we've been seeing. So he can speak to that. We also have Ms. Katie Hagman. She is the Resilience Program Manager for Adaptation within the Office of Resilience for Miami-Dade County. She has a master's in environmental science from Yale, and part of the work that she had learned in her school that I think is particularly relevant for the village as we plan for our resilient future is balancing green and gray infrastructure. So our bioswales, our green areas, and how that interacts with our gray areas, our roads, and our sidewalks. So that is, I think, particularly relevant for the village. Ms. Helena Sola, she is a professor at the University of Miami. She's teaching her class right now, so she'll be joining us probably by 7:15. She is the lead professor that is handling the village's microbial source testing, so she can give us some feedback as to what data they've collected so far and what is still pending and what is conclusive. She's a PhD and a PE in environmental engineering, so she bridges the science with the engineering. She's published over 130 journal articles, including most recent publication documenting beach management practices for all 316 monitored beaches in Florida to evaluate possible correlations with bacteria levels. Next, we have Miss Elizabeth Betsy. We call her Wheaton. Miss Betsy Wheaton has a master's currently she's the director of the City of Miami Beach's Environmental and Sustainability Department. Ms. Betsy and I actually 10 years ago met while we both worked in City of Miami Beach, so congratulations for the work you're doing in Miami Beach, and thank you for being here. In particular, her work revolves around adaptation strategies through the lens of sustainability, and one very significant accomplishment, and she's representing another agency with us here today, she's on the staff steering committee for the South Florida Climate Change Compact, which is one of the leading organizations that are driving some of these climate change research and studies that we've been doing. And her master's is in marine affairs policy, and she's leaving us promptly at 8 because she is pursuing a master's in business administration as well. And finally, we have Dr. Yoder. Dr. Yoder is the Deputy Director of Miami-Dade County Water and Sewer Department. Over 30 years of experience, a wealth of knowledge, and a mentor to me and to a lot of folks in this community for the work that you've done. He currently oversees the utility operation throughout the county. In addition to the administrative work that he does, he has sat on many boards over his long career. In particular, one of the ones that jumped out at me presently is the Waterways Advisory Board for the City of Coral Gables. So he is well-versed on the administrative execution of council-set policies, and he is also very well-versed on policy setting. So that is our panel. So thank you. If we can have a round of applause, thank you for being here. So we're going to stay true to time. So basically now it's 1:15. We anticipate about an hour's worth of questions from the questions that we've already received. And then if we could hold your questions until we get through some of the initial ideas, and then we'll get the mic, and any Q&A will be for about 20 minutes or so. And we plan on wrapping up at about 7:45, 10 minutes till 8. After the panel recesses, the Village Council will be convening a special meeting to take into consideration what we've learned tonight and put together a resolution and whatever action steps we're going to take for legislative policy, prioritization, and appropriations. So with that, I'm going to get started with Dr. Yoder. So I think one item that's been on the forefront of many residents' minds is the facility, the water treatment facility that we have on Virginia Key, which is the Central District Wastewater Treatment Plant. Can you give us an update on the ocean outfall and the overall plant conditions?
Yeah, sure. And I'm pleased to be here and glad to see a lot of you out, because these are issues that affect you locally, but these are issues that are regional in nature as well. The Virginia Key plant, as most of you know, is, I guess I would say, the sort of historic flagship of the 3 regional wastewater treatment plants that we currently operate. It was built in the mid-1950s. It was substantially rebuilt after the city and the county merged their respective water and sewer operations to create what is now the Miami-Dade Water and Sewer Department. And subsequent to the Clean Water Act being adopted in 1972, it was clear that there needed to be a significant upgrade to that facility, and we also built a plant in the north and a plant in the south. So in the mid-1970s, the Virginia Key plant was substantially rebuilt and expanded. It's the largest of our 3 treatment plants with a capacity to treat an average daily flow of about 143 million gallons of wastewater per day. In 2013, we entered into a consent decree with the Environmental Protection Agency based on the aging infrastructure of our system. And in addition to that, in 2008, the state adopted a statute that requires us to basically stop using the ocean outfalls, one of which serves the Virginia Key plant and the other serves the North District plant. Those two programs together, the consent decree to basically upgrade the old infrastructure that is already there, and the outfall statute, which requires additional facilities to be built, combined to a total budget of about $1.6 billion that we are going to be putting into, or we currently are putting into the Virginia Key plant that will be completed in the 2025 to 2027 timeframe. There's a lot of work actively underway there now. It is being rebuilt in a way that will make it more resilient to the consequences of sea level rise and storm surge, the additional storm surge resulting from sea level rise. This is a very convenient time to do that because we're doing so much other work as well. So when it gets completed, it is going to be essentially a new facility.
Okay, so to tie in what has been the concerns that the community has with regard to the water treatment plant and understanding its current condition, I'd like to ask Dr. Almir from the Department of Health what testing you've been doing, what the program entails, and to the extent that you can sort of play off of what Dr. Yoder has shared with us with regard to the existing plant so that everyone can understand what the testing is, what the closures are, why closures are made, and what your process is.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ms. Aga. And thank you for inviting us to your community, and we are part of your community. Basically, we've been testing the beaches in Miami-Dade County since 2000. The program has been implemented. It's a statewide program. Miami-Dade County has been one of the participant county out of the 34 counties in the state of Florida. We have more than 16 beach sites we monitor since 2000. Your community here, your beaches in Key Biscayne has a few sites that we've been monitoring. We test basically for the microbial indicator bacteria called Enterococci. This bacteria indicator, it's recommended by United States EPA. It is based on significant public health studies because it shows that those studies, they show that this bacteria indicator predict basically swimming associated related illnesses like gastrointestinal illnesses when it's present in the water better than any other microbial indicator. So that's why we've been using it. We used the criteria, and it was basically was updated in 2012. The standard for Enterococci in beach water quality is 70 colony forming units of Enterococci per 100 milliliter of water sample. So we do this sampling every week. We have 16 sites. Like I said, we sample Key Biscayne, and we have a state lab across from the Miami-Dade County courthouse. It's owned and operated by the state of Florida, by Department of Health. It's certified. We run the analysis on weekly basis every Monday. It takes 24 hours to basically to incubate the plates and to get the results. And once we get the results, we update our website. It's on the Florida Healthy Beaches website under Department of Health. And if we get the results positive, exceeds the 70 colonies per unit, forming units per 100 milliliter of water sample, we redo the test to confirm the initial results. And if it's, tested, above the 70, then we issue an advisory. We do not to close beaches. We basically issue advisory to tell the general public or the beach goers for a specific site that you have other sites, other beaches that you can go visit. This particular site shown exceedance of the standard, and that means there is an increase in basically in swimmer-related illnesses if you go to this water and you swim in this water. So basically, this is in a nutshell the program we've been running since we have a huge set of data. Since basically 2000, we've been running this program.
Thank you, Dr. Elmir. So that's a very scientific, very technical question. I think we'll reflect on that as we move forward. To follow up, if I may, Ms. Cox, as a representative from Waterkeeper, you are also doing testing. Can you tell us how your process has been complementary to what DOH does, and what steps you've taken to leverage the guidelines that Dr. Elmir's program runs with the advocacy lens in mind?
Absolutely. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Miami Waterkeeper, we're a Miami-based nonprofit that works on clean water issues here in South Florida. And one of the things that we are lucky to be able to do is in-house water quality monitoring. And our work is exactly as you mentioned, complementary to that of the Florida Healthy Beaches program. The Florida Healthy Beaches program does a great job of going out and pulling samples from their 16 sites. And what we are able to do is we take that monitoring data and we actually upload it to a free phone and website application called Swim Guide. And if you don't have it, I encourage you to go check it out online. But it's basically an application that has a stoplight system for water quality monitoring. So it shows you, instead of the sort of scientific results Dr. Elmir explained, it shows you in a simple red means no, green means go system, whether or not it's safe to swim at the beach. And so we post that online. And in addition to doing that, we've been working with the Village of Key Biscayne in identifying some key areas throughout Miami that are essentially what we believe to be gaps in water quality monitoring from the various different monitoring regimes that are ongoing in our community. So specifically, I've been focusing on some key recreational areas on the bay side, whereas most of the Florida Healthy Beaches sites are on the ocean side. And we've been doing our own water quality monitoring, the same process. The only difference is that we are advocacy minded. So when we get a fail on our test results on our Monday or on our Tuesday after the results have been incubated, we post that immediately and we let folks know, and we leave it to the public to decide whether or not they would like to get into the water with one failed test result. And then we will also go back and resample again and again until those results come out clear. So that's one key difference. The state obviously has a little bit more concern with the scientific certainty and, presenting the most accurate data to the public. And we'd rather give the public the information that we have immediately, so the public's equipped to make the decision about whether or not they'd like to, bring their families to the beach and to get into the water. So we've been doing that for a year now with the Village of Key Biscayne at some key locations here on the Key, and then other sites throughout Miami-Dade County as well.
Dr. Elmir, any response?
Yes, I like to make a comment. I want to make it clear that the results we get, we're very transparent. The results we get from the lab after 24 hours, we immediately post it on our website. And if it's poor water quality, it says poor water quality. But we don't issue the advisory until we confirm it. So as a beach goer, if I go to the Florida Department of Health website and I look at the results and I see, Key Biscayne, it's poor water quality, I can make a decision to go to South Beach that it has good water quality. So we do post the results within immediately as soon as we get the results. So I don't see, you said you post the results with the green or red immediately, and we do the same thing, basically. But we don't call it green or red. We call it poor water quality.
Sure. I think the key difference is whether or not we're making the recommendation to the municipality to, issue an advisory or to close the beach. And I think that's the key difference and a difference in our approach. And again, this is the state of Florida, and we're an advocacy group, so we tend to have different approaches sometimes, and that's okay.
So, Ms. Wheaton, if you could, as from the city of Miami Beach, given some advocacy work and the data you're getting there, and then the DOH work, how has City of Miami Beach handled the data that is being provided by DOH and the Waterkeeper app?
Sure. Thank you again for inviting us here. And it's really encouraging to see municipalities sitting together and having this conversation with your residents. I think, being in municipal government for over 11 years, I'm glad to finally see that we're looking at this from a regional approach. Municipalities are coming to the table and working together. As it relates to beach water quality, we work very closely with the Department of Health. When we do receive a spike, we have updated the signage and the process. So that's something that after the summer, we have been working to make an improvement, making sure that we can get that information to our residents. A few months, or I guess back a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, we had a sewer line break as a result of a contractor working in the southern part of our city. And we found out after, I think almost a full night went by. And that luckily we had redundancy in that line. We were able to close it and handle the issue. But as soon as we receive that type of information, we let the Waterkeeper know. We talk to DOH. We continue with ongoing monitoring. So it's this collaborative approach where we want to make sure that we get information to the public and utilizing the different outlets that we have. And I think, we rely on the Department of Health for them to do the water sampling on behalf of our residents and visitors coming to our beaches. But for sure, when we have, spikes that we may be monitoring because of a sanitary sewer overflow, we want to communicate that to the other groups who have a different network. So, for example, Waterkeeper, Surfrider are two of the organizations that we often communicate with when we know that there is an issue in our city.
So, Colonel Dodd, City of Miami, so you know what the village is doing, you know what Miami Beach is doing. Can you share with us some of the experiences that the City of Miami is having with water quality and how the actions you are taking align with the county's overall resiliency strategies and goals?
And I think Dr. Yoder said it's a regional facility, and really what we're talking about is a regional issue because we are all connected. And so participating in different forums like the Biscayne Bay Task Force with the Climate Compact is where we come up with those larger regional solutions. As far as the City of Miami, we have some of these same challenges in the Miami River and specifically in the Wagner-Seibold Canal where we have water quality concerns. And as part of our NPDES permit, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, we have to do water quality testing there as well, which we work in conjunction with the Department of Health and the EPA in order to do that. And it's all about trying to identify where it's coming from and then putting a stop in place to prevent it from happening again. But it is about working together to figure out where it's coming from and then how to resolve it.
And have you found that in the City of Miami, so about a year ago, some of us had met in the City of Miami Beach, and Colonel Dodd was there, and we realized that our driving factors are unique. You don't have the same, so for us, our beaches, are such an economic, vital, and quality of life issue for us. Can you share with us what are the priorities of City of Miami and how they may be different than, for example, these coastal communities?
Well, for us, it's we have less concerns about the water quality from wastewater because the WASD does a great job of managing it for us. But we have a lot of pollutants that are coming into our system through the stormwater system dealing with pesticides, with excessive fertilizer use, with use of glyphosate products. And so we put in place an ordinance to restrict use of glyphosate by the city. We are looking at a fertilizer ordinance that's going to help to educate people and hopefully reduce the amount that gets into the system. And we've taken a very aggressive approach on dealing with sediments, debris, and things that get into the stormwater system, because eventually it will all get flushed out into the Biscayne Bay. And that's a huge concern for our commission, our mayor, to make sure that we're doing everything we can within our areas to improve water quality.
And I can, compliment the village council that, we've also, thanks to the water keepers and Councilmember Petros, we're looking at fertilizers and how those might be impacting our groundwater. If I can maybe redirect to Ms. Hageman. So in the spirit of fertilizers and nutrients contributing to some of these issues, can you talk to us a little bit about what the county is doing with regard to the septic tank conversions and what partnership opportunities exist for the village to help advance the program to get everybody off these septic systems?
So I can, just for background, last year we released a report on how we think sea level rise will affect our existing septic systems. So throughout the county, we have about 120,000 septic systems. And for those to function as they were designed, there needs to be enough dry soil between the drain field where the wastewater leaves the system and the groundwater table. We don't want the groundwater table to mix. There needs to be a certain amount of separation between those two for the treatment to happen. We have some areas of the county where that distance is less than we would like it to be. This was a large regional study where we were using GIS and we were using very large data sets. So in order to really determine how systems are working, you need to get on the ground and to actually measure the sites and to see with more refined information what's happening for a particular parcel. But we still know that overall for those most low-lying areas where we have tidal flooding and the sea level is rising, that we need to come up with a plan to address those. So we have a multi-departmental effort with the Water and Sewer Department and our colleagues from DERM, or the Department of Environmental Resource Management, to come up with what is our action plan. One of the first things that we can do is for properties where there's already infrastructure in the street. So where there's already a system to connect to, that's kind of one of the most achievable and immediate actions that we can take. There are several colleagues from DERM in the audience and who could answer specifically about how those regulatory connections happen, but the village does have a number of septic systems, as you alluded to, and I believe a lot of existing infrastructure that could be connected to. And there are other parts of the city where that's not the case. So fortunately, you're sort of one step ahead in that sense, that there's infrastructure to connect to and should be more cost effective for those reasons.
Right. So the village, as the mayor had alluded to, we still have a couple hundred units still on septic. If I may, off this idea, go to Ms. Julie Dick, who has been working with the village for years and looking at septic and what kind of the impacts are. Can you share with us in your law practice, as you've shifted back, I suppose, to representing private sector developments, what are you seeing with regard to septic and the infrastructure, and what advice are you giving your clients with regard to some of the issues we're talking about this evening?
Sure. I mean, I think with septic in particular, that's a risk for any municipality, even from a liability perspective, depending on where you are. I mean, there are cases in other states where municipalities have had liability under the Clean Water Act because that's a source of a pollutant, and it can be a violation of the Clean Water Act. But besides that, I mean, it's really much more important to figure out a solution and figure out ways to address it. It's very challenging in Miami-Dade County, in so many of these cities where there is no sewage infrastructure. And the solution in those places may not be adding traditional sewage infrastructure. I mean, I think there's some pretty innovative solutions in different parts of the country and the world where microgrid systems are being utilized I think there are a lot of just new design innovations on septic, on stormwater drainage and everything else, where if someone's developing a new community looking at how to address these issues, water quality issues that can evolve, it really makes sense to be looking at sort of the newest technology and the newest innovations out there, where green infrastructure can be used quite a bit to enhance drainage and whatnot, and to reduce the runoff and minimize those impacts over time, and reduce the costs in some cases. I mean, it really depends, in what jurisdiction and what issues specifically you're dealing with. But there are situations where if someone's trying to get a project approved, for example, if they can show that they're improving the stormwater management, creating enhancements to stormwater management, that will help move things forward and help with that approval process and create co-benefits that everyone can benefit from.
That's great ideas. That the village, actually, one of the things that we've been doing is making sure that any of the projects that we're doing, including our stormwater improvements, whenever we're opening up a roadway, we're looking at implementing some innovative technologies, bioswales, swapping out aged infrastructure at the same time to minimize disruption and maximize the opening of the road. So that's a nice segue, if I may go back to Dr. Yoder. Can you talk to us a little bit about the state of the sewer infrastructure within the village and its impacts on overall water quality, and how that may be affecting the beaches in our bay?
Yeah, the village is fortunate in a way, because I believe it is entirely sewered. So the people who still remain on septic tanks at least have something to connect to.
That is correct.
And the larger problem for the county is that it requires, for the vast majority of existing septic tanks, it involves extending the sewer system, which is something north of $4 billion if we were going to do everything within the urbanized area. On the Key, we have been monitoring the water levels in the gravity sewer system. People may know that the typical way a sewer system works is water flows from a pipe from your house down a sloped pipe to a pipe in the street, which is also sloped, and all of that flow goes to a pump station, which either lifts the water up and it flows downhill again to another pump station, and eventually it goes into a pressurized force main, which in this case then goes down the road to the wastewater plant. And so part of the system is under pressure all the time, the force mains, but a lot of it is not under pressure. So the collection system within the village is basically not under pressure. And the concern is that either if those collection pipes have leaks, which inevitably they will over time, if those pipes are installed in the groundwater, which most of them are here, water leaks into the pipes. Sewage doesn't leak out of the pipes. And so we have done a fair amount of work, and we still have some work to do, which we're going to start in December, where you put a TV camera in the gravity lines, and you can actually see where water is leaking into the pipes, and then you can make repairs. We have in 3 of the 12 pump station basins that comprise the system that's here on the Key, we've installed what are called smart manhole covers. These are devices that can measure the water level on a continuous basis, and via a satellite connection can send us the data as to whether the water is rising, so that if there is something either blocking the line, which would cause that to happen, or if there's a lot of water flowing in from the groundwater, we can dispatch a crew to attend to it, hopefully before it overflows. And what we've learned over the past couple of years from the data that we've seen is that that the system here in the village is not as leaky as it could be by quite a bit, and part of that is because a significant portion was constructed within the past 10 years or so. We're going to be continuing to assess conditions and repair those leaks, but I think it is fair to say that the issue as far as the sewer collection system is concerned is not so much that sewage is leaking out and causing a problem on the beaches, but that groundwater is leaking in, which can potentially cause overflows in the streets. But fortunately, we have not had that. I might just mention in passing that at the wastewater plant itself, over the past 5 years, we have had 3 instances where treated wastewater has escaped from the plant and gotten into the bay. But the level of treatment is such for the bacteria, the enterococci that Dr. Elmir mentioned. You may know that when they do their sampling, kind of the cutoff point is 70 colony forming units, because the effluent that is leaving our plant is disinfected. A typical value is about 6 in the treated wastewater. So again, I think it's not likely that is the cause, and I think the studies have shown that there really isn't a correlation between what's going on in the plant and what's happened with the beach advisories. There is routinely an automatic advisory. There's a committee when we have any kind of a discharge from the plant or from our collection system that determines if an advisory, a precautionary advisory, will be issued. And so we did that. For example, recently we had about 35,000 gallons of treated effluent that went into the lagoon down from the plant because of a control system failure. And there was an advisory that was not based on actually measuring water quality at the beach, but just on the basis that there had been a release. And that subsequently, after some amount of testing, was lifted.
Right. So if we could go through the panel one by one, and based on the work that you've done, the agency that you represent, and what you've heard tonight and what you know of the village, and perhaps we start with Ms. Wheaton, if you could share with us what potential solutions you would look to our community to contemplate as we move forward in trying to address the situation. And maybe we go around and then we can circle back to Dr. Yoder.
Sure, thank you. So, I think this is a challenge, and, Miami Beach is working to figure out how we're going to deal with this challenge. So I wish I had an easy, this is exactly what you need to do, because if I knew that, then we would be doing it too. But, I think it starts with education. It starts with educating the public on the fact that stormwater is dirty, the pollutants that we put on our yard to keep our grass green. If we wash our car and that soap, it all goes into our storm drains. When we don't pick up after our dog, again, that goes into our stormwater system. So one piece of it's education. In Miami Beach, we have a number of campaigns. One is our Keep MB Clean, which is focused on anti-litter. We have our Plastic-Free MB, which is focused on businesses and removing single-use plastics. So I think that's one angle. Next is regulation. We've passed a number of fertilizer restriction ordinances. We have another one that is going to be coming up to our city commission in December that is looking to place restrictions on when fertilizer can be used in order to reduce the amount of nutrients going to the bay. We've also had a number of bans related to single-use plastics and looking at our procurement documents and how we're designing when we are developing procurements for contractors to do construction, to even vendors who are operating in the city, to making sure that they are thinking of the city from an environmental perspective. Also looking at our stormwater system. We're in the process of upgrading our system. We're constantly meeting with different vendors who can provide innovative ideas, working with universities to come up with a design that will be an improvement from what we have. And I think it's important that we continue to upgrade that stormwater infrastructure. You know, in Miami Beach, we are still finding wooden pipes underground. And so that is not the ideal. And we feel that when we do upgrade the infrastructure, we get enhanced water quality, but we want to continue to take it a step further. So really making sure that we're investing in the infrastructure that we have, and that's both stormwater as well as water and sewer. Because in the end, it's, you know, one water. It's all connected. And then looking at the future of how we plan our city and how we're designing. So looking at blue and green infrastructure incorporated into roadway designs. We have a number of parks that we're currently looking at to bring in water, even bringing water in from the neighborhood in order to hold, slow it down, treat it on site before it would be potentially discharged, or even potentially eliminating that discharge into open water. So really beginning to look at how we're planning and thinking about the future with a more environmentally focused hat on.
Great, thank you. Ms. Hageman?
Sure. So I would say that, you know, if there are many things that can be done, and some of them are not very glamorous, and some of them can be really improving the quality of the village. You know, for me, first, I would say complying with the existing rules that we have for the septic systems that need to connect to the system. That is, I would say, an important step that the residents should take. The other thing is that, you know, because we have had the sea level, it's risen about 4 inches since Hurricane Andrew, and we expect several inches more over the next 10 and 20 years, that you have to update your design standards as well. So where we have flooding of the urban environment, we have that water picking up all of the contaminants from our tires, from our oil, air, fluids, whatever might be in our urban environment, and then flushing that out to sea. So focusing on the updating of the stormwater design and codes, I think, is not necessarily that glamorous, but can have a big impact. The other, as others have alluded to, is I think there's a lot of potential to use green infrastructure to manage stormwater and do it in a better way than we have in the past. And a lot of those ways make the community much nicer. So slightly narrowing the width of residential streets and adding shrubbery, or adding swales or rain gardens that can be planted with flowers. Those types of things help calm down traffic. They can make habitat for pollinators and butterflies, and also using shade trees can help reduce heat, especially as our summers refuse to end nowadays. So I think there are a lot of ways, even, for example, let's take a large parking lot. Even if you can't have the budget to swap out the whole parking lot for pavers, just integrating a few features where you have additional treatment so that you direct the stormwater to certain areas where you have gravel or bioswales, that can make a big difference in the amount of runoff and also the quality. So I think there are a lot of things that can be done that would also make the village more beautiful as well.
Great, thank you. Dr. Elmir?
Yes, I guess they mentioned everything that should be mentioned. Let me repeat a couple of them. I think improvement to the stormwater system is very important. Using bioswales, using rain gardens, pavers, so on and so forth, to improve the water quality, discharging into the groundwater. Definitely, if you can connect to the county collection system, sewage collection system. It's critical. We continue to look forward for the county improvement for the collection system and for the wastewater treatment plant facilities. Definitely beach management program will help, meaning in terms of, because most of our beaches, we're lucky in Miami-Dade County, we don't have point sources of fecal pollution. We don't have direct discharges of a human waste into our beaches. And in Miami-Dade County, our stormwater system is completely separate from our sewer collection system, which is a good thing. So I think what we need to focus on the non-point source fecal pollution, which is like, for example, how you manage trash and debris on the beach, how you manage sanitary facilities, how you manage pets and wildlife, things of this nature. So better managing the beach in a effective way. What else? I think a very important component, which is responding to spills in Miami-Dade County, sewage spill that may impact, the surface water. We have a very robust program in Miami-Dade County to respond to these type of spills. And the beach monitoring program for Florida Department of Health comes very handy and helpful because we have very good background data on all beach sites when there is a spill. So like Dr. Yoder mentioned in October, when we had the spill, the treated effluent, we, as a precautionary measure, we issued an advisory, but when we sampled, the water quality mimic exactly what the background level for the beaches that we thought may be impacted by the spill. So these are the type of things that, and continue what you're doing, basically.
Thank you. Thank you. Colonel Dodd?
Now, I think the key is on the stormwater system, preventing it from getting into the system to begin with, first of all. And that's where some of the things that we do, street sweeping. Well, last year removed 340 tons of debris and dirt from getting into the system and eventually going out into the bay. And that's not beach quality sand that they're preventing. That's really dirty, nasty stuff that's on the roadways. It's animal waste. It's a variety of chemicals. Cleaning out the system in a very aggressive manner, we removed another 640 tons of sediment and contaminants from the stormwater system just by cleaning it out on a regular basis. There's a lot of construction that goes on where they're dealing with chemicals and sometimes hazardous materials, being very aggressive on enforcing standards to protect the inlets. And that's part of the permitting process that we go through, is inspecting them and then issuing a notice of violation if they're not taking the right measures to protect our water quality. Education is worth its weight in gold. Every dollar that you put into that, an informed person that does the right things will prevent it from happening, but you can't see and catch people all the time. So we really do believe in the education and trying to enforce good behavior versus just trying to catch bad behavior.
Great, thank you. Good evening. Hi. This is Dr. Elena Sola Gabriel. She's the professor from the University of Miami who finished teaching her class and is joining us now. So the question we're going through, kind of a round robin, is what solutions might the village consider that are working in other agencies or municipalities? So, Ms. Dick, what are your thoughts on potential solutions for the village?
Sure. One thing we haven't talked a lot about tonight is the sargassum and the seaweed, which actually captures enterococci and can become a source for some of the contamination, and how we manage that as a village, how that's disposed of, or if it's kept on the beach, can influence the water quality. So that's an important thing for the village to really be forward thinking on and managing in the most responsible way. And it's also just aesthetically, it makes a difference in terms of how we're managing that as well. On beach closures, the village does have a role, or beach advisories, when the information is coming from the Department of Health or from Waterkeeper in terms of exceedances. There's a role for the village to play in educating the public and really making sure. I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone to the beach when there's a beach advisory and there are people swimming and there aren't notices. There's no signage telling people that there's an advisory. There are no flags. So making sure that the public is well aware when we do have an advisory. The septic, yeah, we have a couple hundred septic. That's, peanuts compared to the rest of the county right now, but it can be very significant, especially considering that we're a low-lying barrier island. And the deadline I don't know exactly where it is, but we're right around the deadline for those homes to be connecting. But the village could play a role in really working with those homeowners. There are even financing solutions for sites for specific areas that may benefit from them, where we could handhold and help people find whatever financing they need to really make those connections and move that forward, because it could be impacting all of us. We don't really know all the sources at this point, but that's a very important thing, that we're able to really address the septic with urgency on this island, but also understanding all the sources in terms of our potential risk from our own transmission lines and whatever else, and to ensure that that's being addressed. On stormwater, a fertilizer ordinance would be a great step, but also the master plan. I mean, we really need to be thinking ahead and thinking about sea level rise, and through that, there are a lot of innovative solutions out there, but we need working with some of the best experts out there and the engineering firms that are doing things that are preparing communities for sea level rise, but also there's a risk when you have more flooding. Everyone's talked about then that water is going out. You have a non-point source of pollution with increased flooding. So a lot of green infrastructure, trees, rain gardens can all be used to sort of decrease that runoff. I mean, Colonel Bob worked in Everglades restoration. We have massive cleaning that the Everglades ecosystem does, and we can create those kind of spreader canal systems, but in smaller systems on a much smaller scale that can be very effective in cleaning our stormwater. So and the green infrastructure can really be such a beneficial part of that. I mean, I've been doing some research on behalf of a client lately where just through trees, structured soils, some of these new technologies can really save money in the stormwater system, but they really need to be incorporated into the planning and how that system goes about. Another thing is, with the building code and with development, there's a lot of opportunity for new homes to retain water on site. In a lot of cities across the country, you have green roofs, you have landscaping specifications that can really help to reduce the runoff, retain water on specific lots so that you don't have as much runoff, so you don't have the water going into the neighboring community and into the beaches eventually. So updating the building code in that regard can be helpful. And just in general, sea level rise planning, thinking about increasing the capacity for water that the village has. And then the other part is intergovernmental collaboration. I think the water quality testing has been a great first step, where the village partnered with City of Miami and City of Miami Beach to start looking at what the source has been for the elevated enterococcus readings. But also, as Dr. Yoder was speaking of, they have billions of dollars to spend at the county, and it's very important that the county commissioners understand that there's strong support coming from their constituents in this community and from the local governments around the county to support funding the necessary upgrades to the system for all of us.
Thank you. Ms. Cox?
Sure. So I think that building off of what Julie said, related to village issues here, I think the sargassum piece is really important, and we know that water quality can fluctuate with currents and tides and winds and temperature changes. But we also know and believe to know that the sargassum that we're experiencing, especially this summer, is a form of macroalgae bloom. And what it does is it creates a basically incubator effect for this enterococci indicator bacteria and allows it to grow. And recently, I mean, I'm not sure if this is still the practice, but the village has been burying the sargassum onto the beaches and in beach areas. And with rainfall and, winds or whatever, there's been sort of interfacing between the nearshore waters on the beaches and this buried sargassum fecal indicator bacteria incubator. And so I think that this is something that's immediately within the village's purview to control, is what you're doing and how you're disposing of that sargassum. And it's pretty low-hanging fruit to try to address these exceedances that we have been getting throughout a large part of the summer here, places like Crandon and on Key Biscayne. And sort of building off of that, I'd like to say that this macroalgae bloom that we're experiencing, some scientists believe to be one of the largest man-made algae blooms ever in the history of the world. And that's exacerbated by land-based sources of pollution that everyone's been discussing. And so considering things like nutrients and fertilizers, for example, Miami Waterkeeper has been working on a fertilizer ordinance with multiple municipalities, as you've heard, trying to move the ball forward on addressing some of that low-hanging fruit and how we're regulating fertilizer inputs and nutrient inputs into water systems, especially in nearshore environments. And that's in the wake of the federal government and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration coming forward this year and saying that Biscayne Bay might actually be experiencing a regime shift from a seagrass-based ecosystem to an algae-based ecosystem. And that's really cause for concern because it means we're at an ecological tipping point right now, and we have an opportunity to really start addressing some of these key sources of pollution that we're allowing to run off or flow or directly input into Biscayne Bay and the surrounding waterways. So I think that considering things like fertilizer and beyond that, being sort of personally accountable for what you're doing as a consumer and as a community member, and thinking about the places that you eat and the places that you play and the places that you shop at and live, and what their nutrient footprint looks like and what their stormwater footprint looks like in terms of pollution, and holding yourself and the places that you frequent accountable. And finally, building off of that, I'd like to say that if you're not familiar with these issues, and this is the first time you're hearing about them, I really encourage you to get educated on these issues, because it's really important to be your community's best advocate. And that speaks to what Julie was saying, insofar as coalition building and building consensus at the county level, and encouraging this municipality to take a stand on a larger stage, whether that's with the League of Cities or before the county when we're discussing budget hearings and things like that. Or whether it just means that you're identifying and reporting pollution that you see happening on the water. And we have a really free and easy way to do that at Miami Waterkeeper. We have a program called our 1,000 Eyes on the Water program. It's a workshop training program, and you can come out for 45 minutes to one of our regular trainings and learn about very common sources of pollution, what all this mumbo jumbo means that you've been hearing tonight, learn about how you can document it and then report it to the appropriate government agencies so that they can be really well informed and aware of what sort of inputs are going into the system, and that us as community members and residents are keeping an eye out for our waters, and that we're invested and we care about what happens to the water quality.
Thank you. Thank you. Before Dr. Yoder answers the question, I'm going to shift gears to Dr. Elena Solo Gabriel. If you could provide the village with an update on maybe the scope of the work that you're doing for us, and provide us on some of the preliminary findings you have, which address a lot of the solutions that are being presented tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the audience, and thank you for organizing this. Yes, we are working at the beach. We're going out monthly, and we coincide our sampling program with the Department of Health sampling. Department of Health has been very cooperative, working really extraordinarily well with us. They express to us when they go sampling, how they sample. We mimic, and they actually trained us in the sampling program. So when we go out, we go plus or minus an hour from the Department of Health once a month and collect the sample exactly the way they do it and also process it the same way. But in addition to that, we augment the sampling program so that the regulations for beach advisories are based on waist deep water. You walk into the water at waist deep and you collect the water at waist deep water. We are expanding that process by not only sampling at waist deep water, we're also sampling in knee deep water, in ankle deep water, and we're also sampling in the sand. We sample sand that's underwater in knee deep water, in the intertidal zone, and then also in the supratidal zone, which is the dry sand just above the high tide line. And in addition to that, we do collect the seaweed sample. During the course of the sampling, we go out every month, and during the course of the sampling, the graduate students that go out noticed the integrated sand. So now we also, when we see it, we collect a sample of integrated sand. The reason we designed the sampling program this way is because we've studied many beaches throughout the state of Florida and have found that the source of the bacteria tends to be the sediments, tends to be the sand. So when you have a situation with high tide, right as the water's coming up, right above the high tide line is where the hot spot is for the bacteria. This is normal for all beaches that we've observed. At the high tide line, when the water comes up, as that water then recedes, going towards low tide, it drags with it some of the bacteria. And so that's when the bacteria come back into the water and you get an elevated level of bacteria during that time. And so it happens with the tides. It's a process that happens twice a day. So whenever there's a situation where the tide is a little bit higher than normal, such as when we had king tide back a few weeks ago, I believe there were beach closures at that time. If you have the picture in your mind that the bacteria are from the dry sand just above the high tide line, anything that causes the water to come in contact with that sand and draw the water back in, you would see the elevated levels of bacteria. So at king tide, when the tides were higher than normal, a lot of the beaches exceeded the regulatory limit, and there were some advisories issued at that time. Another period of time that we observed some advisories was Hurricane Dorian. Even though we were not hit with Hurricane Dorian, the winds from Hurricane Dorian did have some effect here. We had a little bit higher winds at that time, and that results in a little higher waves, which then again comes in contact with that zone and brings the bacteria in. And then again, the weekend after Hurricane Dorian, there were advisories. And so there is a pattern in terms of when the water is in contact with this higher than normal sand layer, there tends to be a tendency for advisories being issued. Throughout the process, we've been collecting samples since March, monthly, and we're going to continue on through April. What we've observed so far is that, again, the gradient of the bacteria is lowest in waist deep, a little higher in knee deep, higher in ankle, and then even in the sand, you see the gradient in the highest level in the dry sand. Again, indicating that the source, the hot spot, is the dry sand. We have been measuring the seaweed as well, and when we collect fresh seaweed, when it's, you can tell that it's still living seaweed, the bacteria levels tend to be low, but then once that seaweed starts to decay and degrade on the sand, the bacteria tends to increase in levels. And so again, the decaying, the seaweed itself is not really the source, but as it decays, you start seeing the levels go up higher. So again, it's probably a combination of the sand and the seaweed. Personally, from our perspective, I think integration is okay. I mean, seaweed is a natural thing. It's part of the ecosystem. You want it there. And I think integration is, the system can accommodate some integration, but once you have seaweed levels that are hugely excessive, this past summer wasn't that bad, but the summer before had much more seaweed. Under those conditions, something else needs to be done, most likely, to help minimize the impact from excessive seaweed being integrated. So in essence, that's what we've observed so far with the results, and we're about halfway through. Part of the study also included looking at the Central District Wastewater Treatment Plant. We've collected statistics from the plant, including the flow rate at the plant, the chlorine residual, and the fecal bacteria at the plant itself, and compared it to the bacteria levels at the beach. We do not see significant correlations between the two. We're still analyzing the data. We're tracking down. We have 16 years of data. We're trying to track down 2 more years. But with that data set, we don't see significant correlations. I also have a graduate student that is taking a hydrology class and studying diffusers in the ocean, and he did a mathematical model. And again, the impacts from those diffusers, if you look at it from looking at the currents and looking at the movement of the water, again, would be minimal. And so as long as the wastewater treatment plant is operating as it's designed, we don't see how it can impact the water quality at the beach.
Okay, so let's take a moment. Amongst the panel, I think you've shared some very good points, and you probably have your own questions and things that have come up that you've noted. Are there any questions that you have for each other that might be useful to our community?
I have a question. I'm curious just on the status of the under bay transmission lines. And there are several transmission lines that move wastewater to Virginia Key, and some of them have been in peril at times. I know there have been different replacement processes. Can you just update us sort of on the status of the various lines and when the last inspections were of, say, Miami Beach to Virginia Key or whatnot?
Right. There are 3 wastewater transmission lines that come into the plant. 2 of them come from the Brickell area, sort of adjacent to the Rickenbacker Causeway, and 1 comes from Miami Beach, and of course there's one that is mostly underground that comes from the village. But the oldest of those lines was the 54-inch force main that came from Miami Beach across Government Cut, and that was replaced about 5 years ago because of the dredging of Government Cut. Basically, the pipe would have been in the way, and that new line, which is a little bigger, was done in a tunnel, and so there's a pipe that was installed in the tunnel, and then there is a second pipe inside that pipe that actually carries the wastewater from Miami Beach, and that's about 100 feet under the ground or under sea level. So that pipe is functioning. It's not nearly as susceptible as the old pipe was. Engineers would say it should last easily 100 years, if not longer. So we're good with that one. The other 2 lines that come from Brickell, one was built in the 70s, and an additional one was built in the 90s when there was a failure of a pipe of similar vintage, and both of those pipes are operational. They were inspected and reviewed about 5 years ago. We also did a follow-up to a report that we got from Julie earlier this year, and we couldn't find an issue and did some sampling and so on. So,
okay, thank you. So we said we'd have an hour of panel questions. So at this point, Mr. Jake Osman, who's our Public Works Director and BZP Director for the Village, has a microphone. So by show of hands, how many folks have questions for the panelists? Okay, so it looks like we should be able to get to most folks. So Jake, if you would kindly pass the mic around, and we'll take some questions for the panel.
Thank you. I'm Jose Lopez, a resident of Key Biscayne. I retired from the county in Durham, and I know most of you, but I want to mention something. The sanitary sewer system, if it runs as designed, is not a problem. But the problem is, and the big problem is, that the sanitary sewer system can get plugged with oil and grease. Mm-hmm. And we all contribute, including the public, to protect the sanitary sewer system from the oil and grease discharges. And restaurants have grease traps, houses, it's a matter of judgment, don't put oil and grease in there. But the biggest problem is for the overflows of the sanitary sewer, and I'm saying this in front of all experts. Say if it's not, is the plugging of the pipes by oil and grease. And we had a case in Wausau that a 48-inch or whatever was a big pipe got plugged with oil and grease. Mm. So that is, it happens to the small pipes and to the big pipes.
Thank you.
Don't eat so much fried food.
So I think I heard earlier that...
Councilmember, name and address for the record, if you will.
I'm sorry?
Name and address.
Luis de la Cruz, 640 Allendale Road, Key Biscayne. That we've been testing since as far back as 2000. I forgot which one of you told us that. And one of my concerns that I've been trying to find the research on is, have we always been doing the same amount of testing as we are doing now? Or could it be that we are testing a lot more now than we were before? Could that be related to the amount of beach closures that we're doing? Could we always have been swimming in the type of water that we're swimming in currently? That's number one. And number two is, before the Village of Key Biscayne had stormwater drainage, we were all on septic tank, and the water was never pumped into the ocean and the bay. So yes, we were septic within the Village of Key Biscayne. Now we pump our stormwater and its nutrients and its fecal matter out into the bay and the ocean. So could that have a significant effect on it? So first, are we testing more now? Could that be an issue? Number two is, could the fact that we're pumping our stormwater out into the bay and the ocean be affecting the levels like it didn't affect before? Thank you.
Can I take the first?
Sure, please.
Yes. We've been sampling since year 2000 on weekly basis. We have not changed. In 2011, the program is funded since the inception of it by the federal government and by the state of Florida. In 2011, there has been a change in level of funding, basically, and most of the participant counties in the state of Florida, because the Beachy program, it's a statewide program, they redesigned their protocol. Basically, they've reduced the number of, instead of sampling every week, they went sampling every 2 weeks. For the northern counties in the state of Florida, they stopped sampling during the cold weather from 6 months out of the year. But in Miami-Dade County, we did not change the frequency. We continued to sample on weekly basis. We did not lose any sites. We continue to sample the 16 sites we have on the ocean side. As a matter of fact, we used to sample the only thing changed for us between after 2011, we dropped or we eliminated sampling for fecal coliforms. But we continue to sample for enterococci. And enterococci, according to EPA, US EPA, and their significant public health studies, they show that enterococci is a better indicator for marine and freshwater to predict swimming-associated related illnesses than fecal coliform. And no, to answer your question, we did not change the frequency of sampling, and we continue to sample for the same indicator.
I could say just in general, without talking specifically about your stormwater infrastructure, which I'm not familiar with, but in terms of best practices for stormwater management, they're often focused around slowing down the conveyance of water to allow things to settle out or potentially to be absorbed or taken up by plants. So sort of a best practice is generally trying to slow down the conveyance of stormwater.
I had a comment about, you had asked specifically about the frequency of sampling, and 100% correct, weekly, and it's been weekly since 2000. But the criteria has changed. It has been lowered. It was 104, and I think in 2018 it switched to 71. So it used to be 104 to issue the advisory, and with new studies from the EPA, the criteria went down to 71. So there has been a shift downwards in the level that triggers an advisory in the last couple years. Yeah.
Just on the septic, I just want to bring up the example of the Florida Keys. There were studies done years ago just on water quality in the Florida Keys, and some professors put together a fairly in-depth water quality study identifying the source of contaminants there, and they identified that the septic tanks were really causing the majority of the water quality problems down there. And as a result of that, the entire Keys has been and is pretty close to transitioning to central sewage. The other thing, and others can speak to this better than me, but I think it's fairly accepted that, an ocean outfall of treated wastewater 3.5 miles offshore is not necessarily a source of contamination for our beaches, and that is much less of a risk than it may be perceived to be.
Yeah, maybe just an additional point. If you think back to the early 1970s, there was a federal report that was done about Biscayne Bay water quality in the late 60s that was a description of a disaster, really. And it's not surprising because the wastewater systems that were in place at that time involved lots of primary treatment where raw sewage was just screened and then discharged through a short outfall into the bay or into the ocean. There were probably 100 small wastewater treatment plants that discharged into canals that then went into the bay. And I think it is fair to say that the creation of the regional wastewater system was the single most important step to the renaissance of Biscayne Bay that occurred in the 1970s, 80s, and into the 90s. And I think the issue that we're all kind of wrestling with right now is what has happened since that time that has led us to the situation that we're in now, where we're seeing serious problems with conditions in Biscayne Bay. But I mean, until 1972, when that 54-inch force main was built under government cut, Miami Beach was discharging basically screened raw sewage a few hundred feet off the coast into the ocean. So it's not really so long ago.
Thank you. I would also like to acknowledge our Mayor former Mayor Joe Rasco is here. We acknowledged our elected officials and wanted to say thank you for being here. I think Councilmember Laredo has a question.
But before I pass the microphone, I just want to ask a follow-up question to Dr. Solo. Could you explain a little bit more about the DNA, the microbial source testing, as well as the chemical tracers?
Okay. Yes, in addition to looking at correlations between the wastewater treatment plant and the beach, and looking at the distribution at the beach. Another component of the study includes what's called microbial source tracking, where you look at specific sections of DNA of microorganisms in the environment, and some of them are specific to humans, some of them are specific to dogs, and some of them are specific to seabirds. And so we are conducting those studies. We're very preliminary on those. When we do get an exceedance, we haven't gotten one yet, in waist deep water of the 71 threshold level, that would trigger an additional analysis for chemical tracers. And those would be analyzed for chemicals that are specific to human sewage, like ibuprofen, different kinds of pharmaceutical drugs that would indicate specifically possible presence of human sewage. And that would be sent to an outside laboratory for analysis. But we haven't exceeded the 71 yet, so we haven't sent any samples over for analysis.
Luis Lauredo, 201 Crandon Boulevard. I'm a village councilman. This has been extraordinary, and thank you for your information, but it's a lot of information, a lot of technical information, and I try to get grounded to some common sense questions that I have to deal with as a policymaker. If we've been testing since the year 2000, and if we've lowered the standard from 101 to 70, then, Doctor, to you, specifically the first question, and then to you the second. Why? Why now? What's happening that is this significant increase and alarm? It seems to me that common sense would dictate that we went in the directions. I'm looking for a whys before we find solution. And for you, I've been tracking you in some of your other presentations to learn, sit in the back of the room and learn from you. I'm not convinced that the water and sewer plant in Virginia Key is out of the woods on this issue. And I know some of your colleagues mentioned, as long, the famous caveat, as long as it operates as it's supposed to, it's going to be okay. Well, unfortunately, things don't always operate as they're supposed to. And it's particularly frightening that we have literally an explosion of population and building on Brickell and Base Cane. So I know that sometimes government works, you get a budget and work back from it, but it seems to me that we ought to have some input about perhaps the possibility of, and it's above your pay grade, but some of us with the county commission to see if we ought to move that thing out of here and build a new one, because since you already have a consent problem with the government is telling you it's not up to par. And now you're ready to spend $2 or $3 billion to bring it to minimum standards. So repeat myself as to your, Doctor, your opinion as to why this is happening more now, and then as to you and the
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman, for this question. Well, the short answer, we don't know why. Our program is geared basically for beach monitoring and public notifications, and that's what we basically do. And if we see evidence of fecal pollution impacting the beach, we will note it on our notes and field notes and lab reports, and we will communicate it to the village and to the county and to the whoever is contributing to the problem. In almost all cases, when we have exceedances, we don't know the reason. We don't know the source. And as I stated before, we are very lucky in Miami-Dade County that our beaches, all of them on the beach side, they're not impacted by point sources of fecal pollution, meaning you don't have direct pipe outfalls from stormwater or wastewater into your beach water. But I heard Dr. Helena Solo-Gabriel mention that she started the study with the village. You looked at you did testing for sargassum and so on and so forth. And, for the past few years, we've seen a new phenomenon, which is tremendous amount of sargassum has been deposited on our beaches, including on the beaches in your village. So, and while the sargassum is a natural system, it harbors, basically provides shelter and food for, many aquatic lives and birds and so on and so forth. But they do harbor insects. They provide good environment for bacteria growth. That the bacteria that we find in the enterococci we find in the sand, when the seagrass or the seaweed get integrated with the sand, it provides good environment for this bacteria to grow and to multiply. And if it's washed down the water, the shoreline, so the levels of enterococci in the water may increase. So that's one of the theory. Let's wait until your study is done, Dr. Helena, and we'll have a definite answer on the impact of seaweed on the water quality in our beaches.
Yeah, just to elaborate a little bit too, I agree 100% with the sargassum issue, and it seems as though we've been getting a lot lately, especially the year before last. But I also, personally, I believe our climate is changing as well. Again, our system is very sensitive to the elevation of the water in terms of washing in the bacteria, and if our sea level is increasing a little bit, it's going up a little bit higher. Also, it may be getting a little warmer. 0.5 degree will have a big impact on the ability of bacteria to grow. So it may be a combination of urbanization, but I also think that our climate may also be changing gradually and slowly, but in a direction that would result in more bacteria.
Just briefly on the future of coastal wastewater treatment plants, we did look at the time of the consent decree at the idea that some suggested that it was not a good idea to have 3 wastewater treatment plants in harm's way right on the coast. And the conclusion was, of course, the cost of moving those plants, of building new plants, was extraordinary. The cost of replumbing the entire collection system to move wastewater from east to west instead of from west to east is hugely expensive. And I think in addition, the experience that we've had so far with this infrastructure that is in harm's way is that it has survived significant consequential storms in the past. The best example being the South District plant, which was not very far away from the path of Hurricane Andrew. It's the only one of our facilities that has actually gone out of service, which it did for a period of about 2 weeks because it lost power and our emergency power was washed out by the storm surge. So every water plant, every other sewage treatment plant has basically continued to operate. And what we are doing now with the investments that we're making at Virginia Key is to elevate structures, particularly the electrical and control systems, which are the most vulnerable, so that they are designed to actually withstand the storm surge from a Category 5 hurricane, adding on top the anticipated sea level rise that we expect by 2075. So we think it's going to be a decrease in the risk of failure below what that risk has been since the time the plant was constructed. But there is always risk. So I certainly grant you that.
My name's Charles Sherman. I live at 324 West Heather Drive. I just want to say what I've heard tonight is absolutely deplorable. I'm sure there are many people in this audience who are absolutely disgusted with what's going on down at the beach here on Key Biscayne. There was a little kid on this island who used to swim at the private beach club. There were seahorses angelfish, sergeant majors. There's nothing there now, right? Nobody here, I've heard tonight, has assigned any responsibility or blame. And for you, Dr. Yoder, I'd like to know if it's the enemy, who is the enemy? And if it's not us, who it is.
Well, I think there is some uncertainty, obviously, about that. Some of the studies, some of the work that Dr. Solo Gabriel is doing will help to define that. I think there is potentially something happening that is resulting from sea level rise in terms of the effects of the king tides. Nutrients are an issue that we need to better understand and determine where those materials are coming from and what we can do about it. If you think about stormwater, and you who live on the Key don't actually directly benefit on the Key from the regional stormwater system, which is all of the canals that are on the mainland. And the same is true for Miami Beach. But as sea level rises, there is less storage available, and stormwater can come in big surges. We get peak flows that result when we have big rainfalls, but the 110 billion gallons of wastewater that we treat in a year, I think, is small in comparison with the volume of stormwater that is generated every time we have some significant rainfall. And there is no place for that, or there's less place for that to go as sea level rises. And consequently, it is more difficult to manage that stormwater. And more of it is, it's going to be in people's houses before it finds its way back out eventually into the bay and into the ocean, which is the ultimate place that it goes. So we may be seeing, the ocean temperatures, I think, are getting higher. That may have an effect on how the bay and the ocean react to what has already been there for a long time. So this is something I hate to be the one who says we need to do more studies, but if we're going to invest billions of dollars, we want to have some assurance that what we're doing is in the end going to make a real difference.
If I could just add, I think just on a personal level, I very much share the heartbreak of seeing how these ecosystems are declining. I grew up on the water, grew up swimming in Key Biscayne as well. I'm not very old, and it's changed quite a lot in 33 years. So I think we have all been talking about the science in terms of attributing what percent is coming from which sources, but I think there's a lot more agreement that if something is a source, like say septic systems, is it helping the situation? Likely not. Is the stormwater the issue? Perhaps we couldn't attribute the percentage, but is it helpful to clean the stormwater? Absolutely. So I think there are a lot of things that are important to do, even before you can attribute this percent comes from pet waste in the streets or this percent comes from stormwater. It's important that you have a lot of best practices that are at your disposal as a village that you can implement now that have other benefits as well. So I think, while the studies continue, and it's important to pinpoint them so that you make the wisest choices, but there are also things that just make sense to do because they help the environment more generally, even if you can't quantify exactly what percent of nitrogen you're reducing with specificity.
Hi, my name is Bill Thompson. I live at 300 Ridgewood. I'd like to go back to the discussion on the force main. My understanding is that force main runs from Miami Beach to Fisher Island, and then has a second leg that goes from Fisher Island to Virginia Key.
Yeah, that's correct.
I also understand that the first leg was repaired during the dredging, which makes all the sense in the world.
Right.
But I further understand that the second leg was not replaced. Can you confirm that?
No, it was.
Because I don't remember seeing any rigs out there for
No, you didn't.
months
You
and
didn't
months.
see it. It was done with a tunnel boring machine that was launched on Virginia Key, or it's actually launched on Fisher Island and came up on Virginia Key. So it was all underneath the ground, just the way the tunnel was to the seaport.
Oh, that's great news. Is there somewhere online that I can go and look at that, exactly the dredge area or the repair area that you guys did?
I don't know. I'll give you a card if you like, and I can follow up with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to see. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Charles Collins, 124 Kadima. I have a question for Yoder. So I understand we have essentially DNA testing, which would either confirm or prove the lack of human waste in the sand, right? Is that correct? Is that a reliable test?
It's used to look at whether or not the humans are contributing, and we're looking at it in the sand, in the water, and in the seaweed.
So if he was paying for the test and it confirmed it wasn't his water plant, that would take all of that issue off the table for our planners, wouldn't it?
It identifies human, and there's different ways human source can make it to the beach. One, of course, is the wastewater treatment plants, but also when people go in the water, they shed bacteria from their skin. I mean, we harbor a lot of these organisms inside, and so when we go swimming, there are studies, Dr. O'Meara is very familiar with those, that show shedding from human skin just from bathing in the water. So it doesn't necessarily say where the human came from, but
if we discounted it came back negative for human, we could discount those sources. Am I correct?
Yeah.
All right.
You can. Yes, we're doing two human markers. So if it's negative for both, yes.
I see those coming down the road, and I'm looking
Yes.
at it from the county perspective. That there was a test that could get him off the hook. He'd want that done tomorrow.
Hi, I've listened to this gentleman absolutely verbalized my emotional feelings about this. I appreciate the Miami waterkeepers tremendously brought to our attention the severity of this problem. It's not new. I think the rising temperatures, of course, have played a part in it. But you just have to visualize what we used to see at the beach and what we see now. If there are no seabirds, you know that something is sick in the ocean. If there are no fish in the shallow part of the water, you know that there is something sick in the ocean. That was brought to my attention by a geologist walking on the beach 2 summers ago, right after the first real invasion of the sargassum. If the ocean is sick and we can't swim in it, and the fish are dying on the West Coast tremendously, maybe not here yet, could be next year. So then we should be afraid to eat that fish. We should be afraid to go in the ocean. This is tourism for the state of Florida. I can't imagine why this is being addressed now when this has been a problem for quite a long time. And all of the scientific stuff is great, but that swim guide that I learned from Kelly and from Julie, when it first came out, they said, well, it was only as effective, not you all, but the people in Canada who collect that information said it was only as accurate as it was being reported, and that some of the beaches weren't reporting at all. All of a sudden, I really think because of the waterkeepers, everybody's reporting now. Before that, maybe they were testing once a week, but they weren't reporting. So 2 weeks ago, we not only had a swim guide, prevention of swimming, but we had contact prevention where the windsurfers and all those people couldn't go out on the water for fear of contacting the water. This is critical. I mean, it's absolutely critical. I'm not a scientist. I don't know what the solution is, There was a pipe that was supposed to be going way out with the sewage way out in the ocean. About 7 or 8 years ago, there was a leak in that. And there were videos that we saw online from that leak, and it was patched. I think the patch only lasts so long. So I think it's a bigger problem than what you're saying.
Hi, my name is Daryl Johnson, 139 East Enid. My question is to you, Dr. Yoder, and it's back to this transmission line coming in from Miami Beach. I think he was alluding to that you said, yes, it is a new line. With that line being put in since then, which is approximately 5 years ago, has there been a breach within that line that you all are aware of where the pipe was seamed, the contractor that was putting it in, there was a concrete that was being put in through this through these seams was not up to the quality, and there was issues on those seams? Has there been
No, I'm not. I'm certainly not aware that there's been any discharge from either the portion of the line that went from Miami Beach to Fisher Island or from Fisher Island to the plant.
Okay. All right.
No.
Thank you.
There was you may recall from the year 2000 when they drove a pile through the old pipe. There was about 320 million gallons of raw sewage that ended up both in the bay and the ocean while that situation was being repaired. That was at the marina when they were constructing the marina, but nothing like that since.
Hello, good evening. Javier Aristimuño, 795 Allende Road. I've been living for the last 25 years in Key Biscayne, swimming, surfing, paddling, and as one of the representatives of the community of the surfers, kite surfers, and all the water sport, we've seen an amazing, and I'm absolutely amazed tonight to see the gap in between your information and what we see and what we sense every day on the beach. We used to be sometimes afraid of a shark or afraid of whatever. We used to cross from here to Miami Beach with our kites coming back. Today it's clear for us what we see and what we sense. On low tide, we see feces on the beach. We were told first that it was a manatee, then that it was something else. We've been seeing that the beaches have been closed all summer for infection, for feces in the water. So I don't know what is the level of inspection but we can smell, because there is no mistake when you smell, we can smell when we cross and we pass in front of Virginia Key. It has been unbearable just to smell that area in the water, and we're going out every weekend. So my conclusion tonight is that we are completely crazy, because on our side, we believe that this is more than an emergency, that this should be the first priority of Miami. I was in France last week, and I was at a dinner where people were talking about Miami Beach are infected, no chance we're going to travel there. So it's not only in Key Biscayne, it's all around the world. People know today, with the communication with the media, that our water are infected. So the example of the sea stars are the first to leave a place when water are infected. They just disappear. When we start kite surfing 15, 20 years ago, you had to put shoes because there was so many sea stars that you were stepping on them. Today, I challenge you to find one, just one. I've ever seen one in last year. So I'm just astonished, and I have no words. I cannot even speak tonight. I will go back to our community of surfers and kite surfers and try to understand what happened and why we have such a gap.
I'd like to address that a little bit. I don't know if that was directed at me, but I think that people are mad for good reason, and you want like a silver bullet solution. But I think the takeaway is that there is no silver bullet solution. This is a complex problem with likely many contributing factors, and there are.
The way we throw everything into the sea is not the right way. Maybe that's the route that we need to change.
Well,
Not to continue throwing everything into the sea, because the problem is that 80% of the oxygen that we have in the system comes from the sea. So that's the real consequence. Not that we throw and then we go to the beach and then we can get a bacteria. But the oxygen that we breathe, we're destroying the world.
But I think that, maybe we're a little more technical than people are understanding. But what folks on this panel are really talking about are solutions to address pollutants going into the ocean and things that we can do to reduce that impact on the ocean. And it's not, just get rid of the central district
won't change anything.
No, doing a test won't change anything. This was something that
throwing all these chemicals into the sea is really damaging the sea.
Absolutely,
all
but
the coral reefs are getting bleached, and this is really frightening.
I understand what you're saying. Are you done?
But it's not even the coral. It's us. We're getting sick. We have a lot of friends that get sick recently. We have somebody here that had a pneumonia, and it was related to that. I mean, we're getting sick.
No,
in the water.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a problem, and I don't think anyone on this panel is saying it's not an emergency or a crisis in Biscayne Bay. But what folks are saying is the solutions are complex, and it's a variety of solutions. The village, over a year ago, decided to put money aside to do some DNA source testing so we could try and identify so that the village could try and identify what the source of some of the contamination is. But we do know that these are multifaceted issues. And there are multiple things that we need to do to address it. And some of these things are bigger than us and global problems. I mean, the sargassum is something that is seeding in the Caribbean. And this is a result of runoff internationally that's contributing to it.
Don't you think it's dangerous to compare feces problem in the water with climate change and warming situation and seagrass when the problem is in Crandon, North Crandon, South Crandon, Key Biscayne, there is feces in the water that do not allow us to swim in the water. And it's fecal. It's not climate change.
But I think what the scientists are saying is that the warming temperatures increase the bacteria growth. It's not, there's a source of that bacteria growth, but because of climate change, we have an exacerbation of these problems. And it could be a lot of, our own management of seaweed that is contributing a lot to it. There is a source. There is, we have septic tanks on the island, but I think people want a silver bullet solution tonight, and you're not going to get that. This is a complex problem with multiple solutions that need to be addressed at multiple levels.
Let me give you the silver bullet. You people are going to sit around so long, and we're all going to get sick, and we're going to lose half the population of the world. Then things will get cleaned up. Thank you all very much. I really enjoyed it.
So the Village Council is taking this issue very seriously. And in fact, in 5 minutes, we are convening a special meeting where the council can discuss what we've learned and some of the policy implications and decisions that the council is going to make moving forward. So I think we have time for 2 more questions, I think.
I just want to say, I think it's very easy for us to point fingers at the Virginia Key treatment plant just because it's so close. I don't think it's possible that the pieces of feces that we're seeing on the beach are coming from that plant. It's just not possible at all. That's probably coming from boats illegally draining their feces off the boat.
Manatees. It's manatees.
So 2 more questions.
It's Bob Raymond from Grannon Boulevard. I'd like to ask about the shape of the beach and whether or not we have a stagnant water problem. This is the beach that's left of it in front of my home. I'm told by the University of Miami historians that the water used to be 300 yards further out. We've got a very concave beach between the breakwater, the lighthouse, and the park at the other end. I'm wondering if we don't have a lot of stagnant water. If we had the flow of Georgia sand that we historically have had, we'd have a convex situation, or at least a straight beach where the tides could flush the water in. I'm wondering if it's just the water sitting there and getting dirtier and dirtier.
If I can answer. Yeah, I do believe that the beach shape has a huge impact on the quality of the water. We've evaluated all the beaches in the state of Florida, 316 of them, and looked at the water quality measurements and did a comparison of the what we call the geomorphology, whether or not it's ocean facing, bay side, or is it protected by a structure. And the beaches that have better circulation and flushing have better water quality. So dilution and flushing is very beneficial.
Good evening. My name is Ignacio Sagrola, 881 Ocean Drive. I'm one of the council members here on Key Biscayne. My question is the following, and this is to anyone on the panel, I guess. Given all the studies and investigations that are going on, has there been any sort of independent study of the operations at the Virginia Key plant to in fact confirm that it is operating the way it's designed and supposed to be? Has that taken place?
Well,
with the key word being independent.
Yeah, we operate, of course, pursuant to permits issued by both the county and the state. So the plant is inspected on a regular basis by the Department of Environmental Protection. We have operating requirements associated with the permit. Now, if you're asking whether some non-regulatory entity has done a study of the operations of the plant, and that was done pursuant to somebody other than, say, us. I mean, we've had an army of consultants doing design work and assessment work and so on, but I don't think there's like what you may think of as an independent third party. Yeah.
And okay, thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
The final question is, these official inspections by state or federal authorities, how often do they occur? When was the last time they occurred, and where can we find that information of the results of those inspections?
Oh, I think the inspection results are available from the agencies. Typically, EPA has a group that comes down on an annual basis, but their major permitting responsibilities are delegated to the state of Florida, and they inspect more frequently. I don't recall the monthly or quarterly. And of course, if there's any kind of an issue, they will be there. But I can be in touch with you with a card and point you in the direction. Sure.
We unfortunately are going to have to wrap this up. We've got an 8 o'clock council meeting. I want to thank you all for coming out. And look, I want to thank you all for coming out. But the fact is, we knew there were no answers. This information is it's incredibly helpful to us. I thank you. All these people understand their jobs are trying to deal with this problem, right? Their careers, they're all trying to find solutions. So let's remember that. And so what I would ask is that everybody here, I'll go back to my original point. It's now you're starting to get informed. Now you're starting to realize this problem has no silver bullet. Let's get organized. Javier, you have an idea about putting up the billboards and things. It's not the bad idea. Let's talk about Tallahassee. Let's get some force in Tallahassee to get money to get on these problems, because it's going to take the federal government and the state government helping us to get our beaches back to what they were when Charles Sherman was talking about. So let's organize as a community. This community can do anything it wants if it puts its mind to it. So I'm asking you from tonight, let's be committed and let's stay involved. Thank you again for coming out, but keep at it. Keep coming to the meetings, keep talking to people, keep riling it up. Until we have a solution, let's not stop. So thank you very much. Thank you all for coming and getting this information.